Good morning, everybody, and especially a thanks to people who've had to get up earlier than usual on this wonderful, windy Bodhi day here in the UK. The format for the next hour and a half or so is I'm going to do a short service and I shall pick out from the Nien Pho book little bits which and other resources, little bits which I think illustrate the concept of the spiritual friend. And so that service will last probably no more than half an hour. And then I shall uh, do a little talk for, as well as still as part of the service, really, I suppose. I shall do a little talk for about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes. And then we can open it up to as much discussion or um, comment as you wish or as you don't wish. Either way is fine with me. Um, it's kind of so much of what I really want to say. Other people have said much more eloquently than me the last couple of days, really. So I'm trying to add a little bit more uh, to it. But forgive me if I go over some kind of old ground, as it were. And I don't think it does it any harm at the moment to kind of clarify a few things. And as always, this is my own personal take on things, really. So anyway, to start the service, we'll start in a moment with a little bit of Amitabha chanting. And then we'll go straight to the start of the dawn prayers on page 4 of your service book. If you haven't got the service book, don't worry, you can just follow it. And we do a short section from there, which really kind of invokes the help of the Buddha as our spiritual friend. I suppose there's no greater spiritual friend than the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. And so much of my service will be around trying to ask for their support and their assistance in our spiritual and everyday lives. I mean, the spiritual life and the everyday life are hopefully quite quite integrated. It doesn't always seem to be the case, but hopefully that's so. So we'll start with a little bit of chanting, and I'll do a bell first and then a little bell at the end. Amitabha, 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 Amitabha. Time has passed with the swiftness of light. It is already morning. Impermanence rushes upon us every moment. Mara follows every step. O practitioners of the way, strive diligently, attain nirvana. Rare is it to meet with the Dharma, ultimate and profound, even though one seeks for hundreds and thousands of eons. Fortunately, we now hear and receive it. We pray that we may understand the Tathagata's true meaning. Let the Blessed One teach the Dharma, let the Sublime One teach the Dharma. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are wasting through not hearing the Dharma. There will be those who will understand. The Buddha has said, open for them are the doors of the deathless. Let those with ears now show their faith. Buddhas throughout space and time, reverently do we adore you. Dharmas to the end of time, reverently do we adore you. Sanghas so exemplary, reverently do we adore you. To this holy place, Amida Buddha, highest one, bring your presence now, I pray. To this holy place, Shakyamuni, enlightened one, bring your presence now, I pray. To this holy place, Tathagatas of all worlds, bring your presence now, I pray. I'd now like to lead you, if I may, in a loving kindness meditation. Loving kindness seems the quality, perhaps loving kindness and compassion are the qualities which most readily spring to mind when one thinks about the value of the very precious value of a spiritual friend. So if you'd like to adopt whatever meditation pose you feel comfortable and appropriate, that would be great. I know it's difficult when we're all sitting in chairs, not a problem. But just make yourself comfortable. Keep your back as straight as you can, eyes closed or half open to suit you, and hands folded gently in your lap. So I'd like you, first of all, to send loving kindness to yourself. This is not in an ego building kind of self building exercise, far from it, but we are, someone said yesterday, often our own worst critic, and we need to lay that aside for a while. Well, as long as we can. So say either out loud or quietly or inside yourself, say the words, may I be well and happy. May I be free from all suffering. May I be free from enmity, ill will, and distress. And may I guard and maintain my own happiness. And now we spread our loving kindness out a little bit to our loved ones, maybe members of our family or people that we would consider close friends, including close spiritual friends, of course. And envisage that close group of perhaps 4 or 5 people who you consider to be closest to you. And say again, may this group of people be free from suffering. May they be free from enmity, ill will, and distress. And may they guard and maintain their own happiness. And now we spread our loving kindness to the next layer of the onion, if you like, which is people who we know and like and consider friends, but they're more a general group than the last more intimate group. maybe colleagues or long-standing friends from school, or just associates that you feel quite close to, but not as intimate with as your family and close friends. And may this group of people be free from all suffering. May they too be free from enmity, ill will, and distress. And may they guard and maintain their own happiness. And the next layer is people you only have the slightest acquaintance with, really. It might be the postman who delivers your letters, who you come across a couple of times a month as you're emptying your letterbox, or it might be someone you stand next to at the bus stop and kind of nod to, or many of us use the same shops, and we every week or so, and we come across the same person working at the till, and so we kind of have a bit of an acquaintanceship with them. We don't know anything about them or what their lives might be like beyond what we know of them, but nevertheless, may this group of people be free from suffering. May they be free from enmity, ill will, and distress. And may they guard and maintain their own happiness. And the next layer is perhaps the most difficult of all to send loving kindness to, really, because in this group are people that we're not that keen on, really, if we're honest. There may be people that they might be quite people who you have a lot to do with, but secretly you could do without them in your life, and they might irritate you or frustrate you in some way, or you just don't have that, you don't feel you have that chemistry with them, and it's quite hard to feel loving kindness for people who kind of consistently annoy you. And you can, if you're not careful, you can find that sense of annoyance growing darkly into something more sinister, or almost tinged with hatred, really, because you kind of resent their presence in your life. But nevertheless, this group of people, of course, deserve loving kindness no less than anybody else. So let's say to ourselves, may this group of people be free from all suffering. May they too be free from enmity, ill will, and distress. And may they too guard and maintain their own happiness. We're taking a huge leap now, and we're going to send loving kindness to all sentient beings everywhere, numberless sentient beings across the universe. We can all sadly understand how people and animals and all creatures suffer so much, and it is our will that they all overcome their happiness and their suffering. So finally now, may you and all beings everywhere be well and happy and safe. May you and all beings everywhere be free from enmity, ill will, and distress. And may you and all beings everywhere guard and maintain your own happiness. If you have the service book, perhaps you'd like to turn to page 2 to 3. It's the scripture of Quan Shi Yin. And just as the Buddha and Amida are true spiritual friends, Quan Shi Yin, Bodhisattva, is a true spiritual friend as well. And this scripture, which appears in various contexts scripturally, is best perhaps known. This is a kind of version of chapter 25, the Universal Gateway chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which a chapter which many of you know I'm very, very keen on. And again, it's inviting a close spiritual friend to help us and be with us. So again, don't worry if you haven't got the service book with you. You can just listen, or you can, of course, follow it and recite it yourself if you do have it. The scripture of Quan Shi Yin. In verse, Mujini Bodhisattva asked, "World-honored one, possessor of all grace, what reason is there for Holy One, great Quan Shi Yin, to thus be so addressed?" The honored one made answer too in verse. Just listen to the life of Quan Shi Yin. To calls from every quarter she responds. Of oceanic depth her holy vows. A myriad Buddhas has she truly served, for ages past beyond the thought of man, and made for aye great vows of purity. When people hear her name and see her form, and think of her not vainly in their hearts, all forms of ill in all the world shall cease. If, wishing harm, an enemy should try to push another in a fiery pit, the victim should on Quan Shi Yin's great power think, and straightway that fiery pit shall be transformed into a cool and silver lake. If drifting in the vast ocean's foam, a man should be in danger of his life from monstrous fish or evil beings, let him or her, I take it for granted, it's him all the way through this, but I apologize, it's him or her. If drifting in the vast ocean's, great ocean's foam, a man should be in danger of his life from monstrous fish or evil beings, let him only think on Quan Shi Yin's great power. At once the sea will all compassion be. If from the top of Samuru a man be hurled down by an enemy's cruel hand, just let him think on Quan Shi Yin's great power, and like the sun he will remain aloft. If chased by wicked men, a man should fall upon a mountain. Let him think again of Quan Chi Yin's power, and no injury will e'en a single hair of him sustain. If ringed by enemies, a man should be threatened by them, all with their swords in hand. Just let him think on Quan Chi Yin's great power. Compassion then within their hearts will dwell. When tyrants persecute a man and he stands at the place of execution, let him think only on Quan Chi Yin's great power. The executioner's sword will broken be. If bound in chains in prison, let a man just think on Quan Chi Yin's great holy power. At once the shackles will then set him free. What poisonous herbs or magic threaten harm, the power of Quan Chi Yin, if thought upon, will quickly send the curse back whence it came. If poisonous creatures, evil ones, should come, upon great Quan Chi Yin's power gently dwell. Straightway those evil ones dispersed will be. When snakes and scorpions attack a man, exhaling evil poisons, scorching him, by dwelling on great Quan Chi Yin's holy power, they will be turned away with shrieks of fear. When lightning flashes and the thunder rolls, when hailstones beat and rain in torrents pours, the power of Quan Chi Yin, if thought upon, will quickly clear the heavens of the storm. If struck by cruel disaster's evil hand, or tortured by interminable pain, a being flees to Quan Chi Yin's gentle arms. She, being wise and full of mystic power, will save him from all worldly grief and care. With all miraculous powers well endowed and widely skilled in knowledge of all things, in all the world, in all the quarters, there is not a place where Quan Yin does not go. Hells, evil spirits, beastly creatures, all the evil ways of living, all the pain that comes from birth, old age, disease, and death will for eternity all pass away. Great Quan Chi Yin views all the world in truth, free from defilement, loving, knowing all, full of compassion. She must always be prayed to, adored for all eternity. She is a light pure, spotless like the sun. With wisdom does she darkness all dispel, subverting all effects of wind and fire. Her all-illumining light fills all the world. As thunder shakes the universe does she control her loving body and her thought of great compassion. Like a cloud from which a rain of Dharma comes as nectar down, destroys the flames of evil passions all. When threatened by court judgments, or in camp the military should a man oppress, let him but think on Quan Chi Yin's great power and all his enemies will be dispersed. She is a most exquisite voice, a voice that all the world encompasses. The voice of Brahma, voice of oceans, one that all the voices of the world as much excel. Because of this, our thoughts must always dwell upon her. Let us never cherish thoughts of doubt about great Quan Chi Yin, who is all pure and holy and a refuge true. Protecting in all grief, in trouble, death, disaster, she possesses merit all, regards all things with a compassionate eye, and like the ocean holds within herself a mass of virtues inestimable. For this she must forever be adored. Then rose up from his seat Jiji Bosatsu to stand before the Buddha, saying thus, "World-honored one, they who this scripture hear of Quan Chi Yin Bosatsu must indeed no small amount of merit gain, for here her life of perfect action is described. This is the life of one who, all endowed with powers all miraculous, appears in all directions." When the Buddha thus finished the recitation in the hall of this great scripture, which makes clearly plain the life and work of the all-sided one, all people present then, a great concourse in number 84,000 strong, with all their hearts cherished a longing deep for the supreme enlightenment with which nothing in all the universe compares. I've been very touched by all the spiritual friendship on display the last few days. And for me, this is turning into one of the most memorable Bodhi retreats. We've had some pretty memorable ones. But I have been genuinely touched by it. And as well as talking about spiritual friendship, and we've actually kind of demonstrated it in the course of talking about it, which I think is very, very, very good and very life affirming, really. I want to start with just putting a quote out there from the Dalai Lama, who actually, of course, he's Tibetan Buddhist, not a Pure Land Buddhist, but Tibetan Buddhism has a huge amount to say about Pure Lands, and it's coming from a very, very close place to us. And the Dalai Lama said in the middle, I came across this in the middle of a longer piece on compassion. And he simply says, I want to put this out there and just kind of leave it hanging for people to pick up later on if they wish. I will tell you something. I love friends. I want more friends. And I thought, it's a simple statement. But what he doesn't say is that I want more mentees or people to mentor or to be mentored by other people. He doesn't use that word friendship. He puts that square and center, and I think that's a kind of interesting one, considering he is, he's obviously a very holy person, but he is at the top of a vast hierarchy within Tibetan Buddhism, which may, and of course he's treated as a guru by lots and lots of people, or a kind of guru by lots and lots of people. And yet at the same time, he uses that word friend. He doesn't, he cuts through all the kind of hierarchical stuff. So I'll just leave that out there. And yeah, I used to teach on a voluntary basis. I used to teach when in my Theravada years, as many of you know, I practiced in the Theravada tradition for probably 20 years. And as part of my kind of practice, I tried to teach English to small groups of usually Thai monks who came to England and didn't speak much English and lived in the temple. They lived in the temple. And I used to go across once a week and teach them English. And it was, without being, well, I've still got presents that they gave me as a kind of thank you for teaching them. And I felt kind of grateful for those presents, but uncomfortable as well, because my efforts to teach them were quite random. And we used to have a lot of fun. Actually, there were usually a group of young guys who were in their 20s who had a lot of energy, a lot of laughter, a lot of positivity. And it was like trying to herd cats, I suppose, at some stages. And they used to laugh at each other. They used to laugh at each other's efforts to speak English. I remember once there was a guy who I was teaching them articles of clothing and hats and socks and trousers and the English word for all of these. And this one guy, he just couldn't say the word glove to save his life. And it used to come out as a kind of grunt. And the others used to make him say glove. They used to, on every occasion, they would try and get him to say it, Oh, where did I put what's the word for that, and he'd try and say it, and then they just fall about laughing because he couldn't say it. So it wasn't a terribly kind of solemn practice that we had. But the reason that's a bit of a digression, sorry, but the reason I bring that up is because I felt uncomfortable with these gifts that they used to give me when they returned to Thailand after their kind of placement in the UK, if you like. And I felt uncomfortable with them because I taught them all sorts of irrelevant stuff, and I didn't teach them what they really needed to know. They viewed me as a teacher. this is a generalization, but some Eastern cultures really revere a teacher, not just a religious teacher, but any kind of teacher. If you're any kind of teacher, you know, you are to be kind of revered and given presents and kind of bowed to metaphorically. And I felt quite uncomfortable with that because I didn't really teach them what they needed to know. I'll give you an example of that. And many of you will know that Theravada monks are obliged to eat before noon, and they are not allowed to cook their own food. Food has to be cooked for them and presented to them. They can't just help themselves. And that's designed to kind of foster dependency on the laity, and it's designed to combat greed. And we can have an argument, a discussion about, you know, the kind of validity of that practice. And there was one monk that I was particularly close to who found himself on his own in the temple. And it was about approaching midday, and he hadn't had anything to eat. And they're not allowed to ask for anything to eat. And he was on his own anyway, he couldn't just help himself. And he found himself in the kitchen of the temple in front of a bowl of satsuma oranges and apples and all sorts of fruit. And the postman turned up. And rightly or wrongly, this young monk kind of tried to, and again, rightly or wrongly, I suppose, by strict definition of his vows, he wasn't supposed to do this, but he didn't ask the postman for to present him with any fruit to eat, because he knew he wouldn't be allowed to ask. But he kind of made various suggestions and looked at his watch and indicated the bowl of fruit. And the postman was completely bemused by this. You know, he wasn't a Buddhist, didn't know anything about the customs of monks. And the postman thought that this monk was offering him some fruit. So the person was like, no, thanks, I'm all right, you know, I've had my breakfast and all the rest of it. That's fine, thank you very much, but, you know, I must be on my way. And the young monk got quite insistent and said, no, he's pointing at the fruit bowl and then pointing at himself. And the postman said, oh, all right then, you know, to please you, I'll have it. So the postman had this orange and peeled this orange and ate this orange in front of him. And the poor old monk poor young monk was, you know, no, this is not what I intended. And he didn't eat that day. He didn't eat that day until proper catering arrangements came in again the next day, and he was able to eat. So he stuck by his vows. But I have to look back on that incident as an example of me, a teacher in inverted commas, not teaching people what they needed to know. You know, I should have, you know, focused some of my teaching on trying to get him to explain these sorts of customs. Instead, I was teaching him stuff that he couldn't ever need, like, you know, how to book into a hotel, how to complain about service at a restaurant, what gloves were and stuff. So I didn't teach him what he wanted to know. And as a kind of lesson in that, I think, in to do with the position of the teacher. And you know, I do think that in order to be a teacher, we all have to be a learner. We have to learn what the other person needs and wants to be taught. And otherwise, it can go straight over the other person's head. So I have another example. I have a particularly high regard for Rowan Williams, who's the last but one Archbishop of Canterbury. And I love to read his stuff. I think he was is a genuinely spiritual man. He's still alive. And I remember several years ago being invited to go to a talk that he gave in Chester Cathedral. And I couldn't go, but a friend of mine went, and I said afterwards, I said, how did he go? How did he go? And he said, oh, he said he's the most wonderful man, but he said everything he said just went straight over the audience's head. You know, it was so high flown, so academic, and you know, it wasn't what people needed to hear. I suggest at that time. So, you know, we don't want. The problem with teaching is that we assume that what we're going to teach is what people need. And you know, a teacher can teach in an empty room, really. You know, if you fancy yourself as a teacher, you can stand there and you can pontificate, and but to learn is a different matter altogether. To learn, we need another to learn from. We can't just do it on our own. Even if it's a book, you know, we can't just reabsorb learning from nowhere. It has to come from somewhere. So I know we're talking about mentoring or spiritual friendship here and not teaching, but so much talk in Buddhism has been of teachers, you know, teachers, revered teachers, and obviously, you know, there are teachers around who are absolutely worthy of respect, and there's not a problem with that at all. But it does imply, as I think so many people said yesterday, the whole idea of teaching implies a kind of power imbalance, especially when it's applied to kind of mentoring. It implies that one person is more in a position to offer advice, and then the other is more positioned to receive it. And so the only way we can overcome this is for the teacher to recognize that they need to become a learner, to learn what they need to teach. So then we've moved to a situation where each person in the relationship is learning from the other. And as I said yesterday, and so many other people said yesterday, the key to this is listening. And as I also said yesterday, I'm not very good at this. If there's an empty space, a silent space, I do feel this kind of imperative to fill it, which is not very helpful, and arises from anxiety, I suppose, really. So listening and watching, you know, watching other people is important as well, learning from what they do. And I guess that's how we learn from ritual. You know, we learn that, you know, as Pure Land Buddhists, we learn that as we practice, as we watch others practicing Nembutsu and hear others practicing Nembutsu, we learn that this is the way that our Amida said we would get to the Pure Land. So watching and listening are so, so important. Some of you will know as well that one of my favorite philosophers, a 20th century philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, who I have mentioned before in talks, who his family were, he was a Jewish philosopher, and his family were killed in the Holocaust. But he has a huge amount to say about the other and about suffering, really. And that we learn from the face of the other what we need to do. Okay. So we become a spiritual friend to the other by watching what is going on in their face, watching where the suffering is, listening for where the suffering is. And a guy called Richard A. Cohen said a sentence which is quite hard, really, but I think it's worth repeating. I'll say it a couple of times to get a head around it. Don't worry if you find it a bit jargonistic, but I think it's worth sticking with and trying to listen to. The otherness of the other person arises precisely as the moral imperative that pierces the self with moral obligation, with service to the other. And that's a kind of posh academic way of saying what I've been trying to say, is that one becomes a spiritual friend by recognizing the otherness of the other person, and we kind of depend upon recognizing that for our own validation. And he goes on to say, it's not an issue of love thy neighbor as thyself. it's a question of to love thy neighbor is thyself. This is how we get our validation. The justification for our existence is by helping people along the path of their lives, really. It sounds very worthy and it's very hard to do, of course, and we don't live up to it. But I find that a very potent, a very powerful idea. To love thy neighbor is thyself. That's what defines us. Self-love doesn't precede other love and is not the measure of it. And I think all this fits in beautifully with the Bodhisattva vow, that all these impossible things that we vow to do, but we just have to roll our sleeves up and get on with it and do the best we can. We rise and fall together. And I think that's the key to the whole notion of spiritual friendship. Your Nembutsu is my Nembutsu and vice versa. This is the idea behind, some of you may know this already, forgive me if you do, but this is the idea behind Yuzu, so-called Yuzu Nembutsu, or mutually inclusive Nembutsu, as taught by Ryonin, who was born in 1072 and died in 1132, the year before Honen was born. So obviously around the time of Honen's life, there was huge interest in the whole question of Nembutsu and the best way to do it. And a lot of these ideas were kind of picked up and moved on from, or modified by Shinran, of course. Anyway, Ryonin was an interesting guy. He came from a Tendai Japanese Buddhist background, and he trained on Mount Hiei near Kyoto, and there was a whole complex of temples built in the Ohara district of just north of Kyoto, and he was very involved in setting up these temples. It was a great time of excitement and of really flourishing, if controversial, Nembutsu practice. And what he meant by Yuzu Nembutsu, or mutually inclusive Nembutsu, was that one person is all people are one person, one practice is all practices are one practice. And takes a bit of getting your head around that, but it just means basically that we all support each other in our practice, and our practice becomes meaningful in relation to other people. And it's what we have in common, this belief in the power of the Nembutsu. We may differ slightly in what we think that power is and how it operates, but the commonality, the thing that binds us, is this inclusiveness, this mutually inclusiveness, and we help and support each other. So I like to think of, what differentiates a Kalyana Mitra, a spiritual friend, from a mentor, is that there is a kind of implied hierarchy in mentoring, and that might be justified in certain situations. I'm not totally knocking it, as it were, but I think what is distinctive about a spiritual friendship is that we're alongside each other. We're not over or under. And why do we need to be alongside each other? Why do we need, we've had this idea of the wide road west. Why do we need to travel that wide road to Sukhavati, to the Pure Land in the west? Why do we need to travel that road together? Why can't we just, why do we need spiritual friends? Why can't we just do it our own? There's a lot of, sometimes the whole notion of a pilgrim sometimes is that it's something that people go on pilgrimage to find out the truth on their own. It's not necessarily the case. Chaucer's pilgrims in medieval England, travel together and all the rest of it. And I guess other kinds of, I can think of Islamic pilgrimages, which are very collective activities. But nevertheless, I think sometimes we think the idea of the solitary pilgrim with his knapsack and his staff and driving up a mountain. And I think it's, why do we need to be with other people? Why do we need the spiritual friendship? Well, from my perspective, simply encouragement. Encouragement. You're not alone if you've got a friend. It's as simple as that. It's not rocket science, if you like. We give each other confidence. We can encourage people through example. We can kind of model what a Pure Land Buddhist life might be like. And we can encourage two things. Somebody mentioned energy. I can't remember what it was yesterday. Spiritual energy, which in the Theravada tradition is one of the perfections. Because what energy we have, we need to encourage each other in it. We also, one of the perfections in Theravada Buddhism is endurance. And it's not a question of kind of gritting your teeth and, I've got to put up with life and it's not that sort of thing. It's just encouraging people to keep putting one step in front of another. I think the sense that you're not alone. I think it was Bhaktika yesterday talked about Tonglen, transforming suffering into loving kindness. And it's great to have other people alongside you as you're doing that, And speaking of encouragement, courage is, of course, the central word in the larger word, encouragement. And we do need courage. The spiritual transformation is a very powerful, a very, very powerful thing. It's not for nothing that we talk about the lion's roar, the lion's roar. If you hear the lion's roar, it's a faith and practice which will change your life, and that can be challenging. It is challenging. I think it's kind of, in my experience, the biggest challenge of living a spiritual life is that you can feel isolated because your values seem very much at odds with the values of or can often seem at odds with the values of the rest of the world around you. And it's hard to live in a world where the bulk of the population seem to view life completely differently from what you do, how you do. They have different priorities and different assumptions. And so through our faith and practice, we're creating a space in which the radical other, the promise of Amida, can enter our lives. And that journey can be very unnerving and unsettling. It's, we, as Genshin, the Pure Land thinker, said, and Dante, the Christian one, on the spiritual journey, we visit the hells as often as we visit the heavens sometimes. And it's good to have a Kalyana Mitra by your side as we do that. And it's a serious business, and I'm not saying that it should be solemn all the time. I think joy and laughter are part of the path, and I wouldn't want to suggest that that's not the case. But nevertheless, we do need encouragement, and we do need support that we're not going crazy sometimes, because these things are spiritual experiences, without trying to kind of mystify them and make them beyond the reach. They are spiritual, and the challenges we face in everyday life, families and all this sort of stuff. It's good to have people by our side. But keep the endurance going, but keep the keep the joy going as well. Another reason why we need someone by our side, and I think we get a clearer idea of what we can offer and what we can't offer, and it keeps us on track in our spiritual practice, really. I think it's easy to get too intense. It is easy to get too intense. I think intensity has its place, but we need a sense of balance and a sense of proportion. And we need to know when it's, when we're getting things out of perspective. And I think that's an important thing about a friend. They can tell us, for goodness sake, it's all right. You don't need to bother about this, that, or the other. It's all right. So a sense of balance is important, and a sense of appropriateness. Dyer sent me this brilliant article a few weeks ago by Joan Halifax, who's an American writer and Buddhist practitioner, very eminent Buddhist practitioner in the Zen tradition. And Joan Halifax, according to this article, asked a Zen master, what's Buddhism all about, in your view? And this Zen master said, Buddhism is all about responding appropriately. Responding appropriately. So whatever comes your way, a spiritual friend needs us to encourage us to respond appropriately to what's going on. That may imply not worrying too much about a particular thing, or it might be, advising or talking through some things that not to make matters worse in a particular situation. We can all think of our own examples of it. Right. Controversially, another reason why we need a spiritual friend is because this world is not yet the Pure Land for most of us. And if we were already in the Pure Land, and I know people may disagree with me about it, if we were already in the Pure Land, you don't need a lot. You're there. You've made it. You're sitting underneath a jeweled tree and everything. But while we're still in samsara, we need a friend, or more than one friend. Lots of friends. So, I think the final thing that I would say to us is that having a friend enables us to speak from the heart, and to talk about what really matters. If you start talking to complete strangers about really deep things, you'll probably get incarcerated pretty quickly. But we have this need, don't we, to speak from the heart in as many situations as we can, to overcome our own anxiety. Somebody said yesterday, this is a wonderful quote, I think, is we need to start wanting what we already have. And I think spiritual friends can reassure us that we've already got so much going on in our lives, so much positivity in our lives, hopefully, so much joy in our lives. And so let's start wanting not what we haven't got, but let's start really wanting what we already have. Okay, a couple of points to finish with. Bhaktika came up with a really, really good point yesterday near the end of the day, as he often does, of course, which was, it's all very well having this, discussion about what spiritual friendship is, but how do we actually go about doing it? And from a purely, I haven't got many answers on this, but my personal perspective on this and how this spiritual friendship kind of fits with the Amida order, or could fit the Amida order, is that I think for all kinds of reasons, people shouldn't be assigned, as it were, or invited to have a mentor or a spiritual friend or whatever too early on in their engagement with the order. Again, this is a personal opinion, but I think once people are kind of comfortable with the order and embedded, sorry, embedded is the wrong word, but once the order becomes a significant, or working for the Amida community becomes, engaging with the Amida community becomes a significant part of their lives, and we know them and they know us, at that point they can be invited to, or they can ask for some spiritual mentoring. But I think for all kinds of reasons, not least of which is kind of safeguarding considerations, I think that it should not happen too early on with people's interest in engagement in the order. I think it can look too much like a kind of initiation rite, or it could even be viewed as a species of kind of indoctrination, which if you start too early on this kind of thing. And I think timing is really important on this. And I think we need to keep this spirit of radical openness, and we're not in the business of indoctrinating people, and we need to keep we're not in that business at all, and we need to be open, accessible, and encourage people to take their time in their relationship with us. And it's as I said, it's not initiation or indoctrination. It's an opportunity, I think, by offering people a mentor or a Kalyana Mitra, is you're offering people an opportunity to deepen their spiritual practice. And so I think timing is quite important on this. Finally, the idea of the path in Pure Land Buddhism, it has to be wide enough for at least two to walk abreast. That's one of the reasons why. So you're walking the path with at least your spiritual friend. So it has to be wide enough to walk side by side, not one before the other. And this is one of the reasons that I like the idea of a road, because on that road we learn much more than we teach. And it's wide enough to walk side by side, learning from each other. And I don't know if you, forgive me if this sounds a bit obscure, but there's a play by Shakespeare called Comedy of Errors, which revolves around, it's a comedy, and it revolves around the separation of two lots of twins who become separated by shipwrecks and all kinds of things. And eventually these two sets of twins find each other again. I know the idea of twins don't necessarily get on. Somebody reminded us of that yesterday, but there's a kind of platonic ideal here of twins being close to each other and going apart and then finding each other again. And I think for me, there's a very joyous reunification of these twins at the end of the play, which I find very moving and kind of illustrates the idea of spiritual friendship perfectly, that we find somebody and somebody finds us. And I think that's a very subtle but very powerful process. And the joy on these twins' faces when they finally kind of find each other again. And the two lines from the line of the play, which I've adjusted one word from brother to sister, and you'll see why in a minute. But I find this kind of encapsulates the idea of a spiritual friend so well. So this is the last two lines from Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors. We come into this world like brother and brother. Let's go hand in hand, not the one before the other. So I've changed that to, we come into this world like sister and brother. Let's go hand in hand, not one before the other. Namo Amida Butsu. And I just want to very finally finish with the celebration of Amida's vows. So please join in if you, it's on page 8 of the service book, please join in if you so wish. The original and sacred vows are the unique and essential grace by which to enter the Pure Land. Therefore, with body, speech, and mind, we are devoted to the teachings that all may attain the state of bliss. Namo Amida Butsu.